Yay, here we are. Here we are. Thank you for your patience. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are here for week 4. Today, we are going to talk about the inner child returns home. So, last week, we really spoke about sort of this energy of the inner language and all of what that means. I don't want to do too much review on week 3 because you can find all of these videos on YouTube. They're recorded there and actually on Instagram too. So you can go back and look at them. But just for a quick review, I just wanted to go over this whole idea of trauma and what happens for us when trauma happens. So in my own life, what I recognized, not early on by any means, but as I started to heal, what I recognized was that energetically I left. I left. And I now consider that leaving my inner child. We're going to talk some today about what happened in that process of leaving and what I did. It's interesting. I was at a talk last night. I was talking to a group of women in our town, and it was fascinating for me to talk about this to them because so many of them really understood that concept of leaving when something that hurts us, that affects us in a profound way, um, evolves, right? So, what happened for me in that event was that at the loss of my mom and my dad, there was just this kind of disarray. There was just this feeling of, what am I going to be able to do here? You know, I was 13 years old and I kind of went into this place of feeling like I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. That was survival mode. So, in that survival mode, what I really decided to do was to create this mask, to create this persona that would never, ever allow people to see the shame that I felt for these losses. And that that was a lot of work. That was a lot of work. Creating a mask, pretending to be something that I wasn't, was a lot of work. One of the questions last night from this group was, did you know that you were creating a mask? And the answer to that is, at 13, I absolutely did not know that a mask was being created. What I did know is that life felt really challenging. It felt really super, super scary because there was really nothing recognizable to me in this new way of interacting with my life. And that's the thing, right? With these catalytic events that happen that ultimately change our life forever, is that on the other side of this event, so life was this way before this event, and then after this event, it was completely different. So I was in completely uncharted territory. So what I did sort of intuitively, or maybe we could call it my ego, maybe we could call it just survival mode. What I did was I created something that I thought others would like in me. Yeah. So, this performative way of interacting with my life, which I just said was exhausting, was because it wasn't really aligned with who I was at all, right? Because what I was didn't work because everyone left. My mother and father left. So my young mind equated that to, wow, that's not a successful way of being. So let's create something else, which is what I did. So what I created was actually pretty successful for quite a while. I hadn't ever really thought about the amount of time that I was in that place. It was about 20 years, 20 something years that that went on, where again, the inner child, that part of me, the energy left, right? And I created something else, something that I felt others would want to see, something others would like, something others would recognize as shiny and polished up enough that they wouldn't leave me to. So I think the important thing about what I'm saying there is there was nothing there that was looking onto into the inside of me, right? And we think about that. We think about referencing our life from the way others are always interacting with us. So if somebody out there was upset with me, then I would just naturally feel that I wasn't worthy, right? If something went on that I felt was unsuccessful, then I felt unsuccessful because all of my cues came from the outside, not from the inside. That's pretty hard. It's a pretty hard way to live. So I titled this week's talk the child returns home, the inner child returns home. Because in in a process of healing, typically, at least in my case, something had to happen that really said, wow, this is not successful. This is not sustainable. I can't go on living like this forever because it's just too exhausting. So for me, what it was a physical response. And many of you have heard me speak about this, right? That my body, I was what, 20 or 28, 29 years old, was breaking down. I had a suppressed immune system. I caught every cold there could possibly be. My breathing was very shallow. I got shingles, very young, which was all over my middle body. And then ultimately, the straw that broke the camel's back was bronchial pneumonia that had me in bed for almost a month. And when you can't breathe, boy, you sure do wake up to what's going on around you. I had two young children. I had a business. I had a home. I had a husband. There was so much happening in my life, and I couldn't even get out of bed. So at that point, I really had to take a look at what was happening in my life. And this is where I want to start to read you some of the things because, like I said at the beginning of this recording, um, well, let me say this, because I did an audio version of this book, and I remember being in the studio recording it. And when I came to this part of the book and I was reading it, we had to do so many takes. I had to redo it, redo it, redo it. And finally, I looked at the producer and I said, "What do you think this is?" And he says, "Is this hard for you to read?" And I said, "It's really hard for me to read." So, again, today, as I was writing out what I was going to say to you guys today, I was looking at it and I said, "This is really tough. This is really tough to revisit this." So, bear with me, okay? Bear with me. So I write, before I could nurture my inner child home again, I had to understand the survival traits I'd taken on to make it through all that I had lost. I validated the abandonment in my own heart, recognized the devastation my losses had created, and mourned what it took from me. The process was similar to that of losing a loved one, but now it was the most vulnerable part of me I was mourning. This is very important because I feel like, in a process of validation, one of the things that we've really got to understand, we can validate our loss. We can. And I think it's a solid, beautiful move because really the opposite of validating is being victimized for the rest of our life. But when we actually stand up in strength and say, yes, I'm validating what I've been through, but in fact, I am not going to stay there. This happened, but I'm ready to move on. But in mourning the loss of who I'd been since my trauma started when I was 13, it was like losing another part of me. And I was. Basically saying, this isn't working anymore. We've got to do something very different than this. And so there was that same feeling of loss showing up again as I was healing through this process. So I said there was no changing what had happened, so I needed to figure out how to change how I'd address the suffering. I adopted a defensive posturing toward her. I became guarded around any situation that made me feel tentative and vulnerable. I put on the mask and caged my heart. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Now I want you to listen to this beautiful poem. This is by the author Charles C. Finn, and the poem is "Please Hear What I'm Not Saying." And I have such fond memories of this because, of course, my editor had to reach out. We had to get permission to put this in the book, and he was so happy. He was a pretty old man at this stage of the game, so it was really beautiful. He felt that this poem had meant so much to me and has meant so much to people that have read my book and of course read his book all those years ago. So here we go. Please hear what I'm not saying by Charles C. Finn. Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face I wear, for I wear a mask, 1,000 masks, masks that I'm afraid to take off, and none of them is me. Pretending is an art that's second nature with me, but don't be fooled. For God's sake, don't be fooled. I give you the impression that I'm secure, that all is sunny and unruffled with me, within as well as without. That confidence is my name and coolness is my game. That the water's calm and I'm in command, and that I need no one. But don't believe me. My surface may seem smooth, but my surface is my mask, ever varying and ever concealing. Beneath lies no complacence. Beneath lies confusion and fear and aloneness. But I hide this. I don't want anybody to know it. I panic at the thought of my weakness exposed. Yeah, when I read that, it was like, wow. I said earlier, I didn't have really any idea what was going on for me when I was younger, what I was doing, that I was putting on this mask. And in fact, when I read that, I was like, this man has just put these beautiful words together and given me language that I didn't have before. So this was a very valuable part of what we discussed last week, which was becoming fluent in the inner language of your life. And when you are untangling something as profoundly difficult as trauma, it's just these little opportunities, like I had with that poem, where you go, "Wow, I'm finally being understood at some level. There's somebody that's put words together." Or when somebody reflects something back to you and allows you to um, hear what you've said, in a beautiful, caring, loving way. Um, these are the types of experience that really um, give you the chance to mirror yourself, and see who you are at a deeper level. So, yeah, that was really a really extraordinary thing for me. Um, I want to really bring light to this. I adopted a defensive posturing towards hurt. I became guarded around any situation that made me feel tentative and vulnerable. Now, that's really an important thing to say, right? Because, I also did my best to try to control every situation that I was in. So my vulnerability, my insecurity used to show up when I didn't have control. And of course, we know, right? So oftentimes, life just doesn't allow us to control it. I mean, most times, life doesn't allow us to control it. So when we have this controlling um, tendency, we can feel vulnerable pretty much all the time because there's really nothing we can control except ourselves. So the way I would respond to that was to really just drop back into the mask, drop back into caging my heart. And what happens in those times is we don't let any experiences in, right? So in my case, there was this experience with my husband. I'd been married to my husband for quite some time. I think I got married at 20. I know I got married at 25. And this all started happening in my early 30s, right? When I started to have an awareness around this and wanting to heal. And so, what I realized with my husband, for instance, with this caged heart, was that I kind of had one foot in our life and one foot out all the time. And that was a discovery that came through when I was in counseling, when I was in therapy, was, I really wasn't in it because it was like, oh, yeah, if I can just be half in. Oh, if something happens with David, if he dies or if he leaves me, which were my two abandonment issues, then oh, no problem. I'll be all right, which is the biggest lie you can tell yourself, right? The biggest lie you can tell yourself. So we think that we're actually protecting ourselves in these situations. In fact, we're not. What we're doing is we're living life not not fully, not even partly. We're basically living like an alter life that doesn't allow us to really drop in and experience life in its fullness at all, at all. So we're untangling this understanding that we are protected by putting on the mask, by caging our heart. It's false. It's false. All we're doing is missing out on life when we do that. So, right, in order to invite the beautiful inner child back home, to bring that energy back here so we can heal, we have to start pulling apart these falsehoods that we've told ourselves. So, I reacted to situations that made me feel insecure. And then, after reacting a certain way, I wondered why I had said hurtful words or acted aggressively. The regret, right? The regret. It was just like constantly living in this place of regret. These traits were old ways of being that no longer work for me and damaged those I loved. They were all based on fear, bringing more fear into my life. And as this protective approach, my caged heart, no longer supported the type of life I yearned for, I started to pay attention to my defensive behaviors. It was a giant wake up call for me, giant wake up call. It was like, why am I hurting people? Why am I closing people out? And, one of the tendencies I think we have when we participate in this closed down place is that blame, victimhood, they're all part of what we experience because the bravest thing, the most courageous thing that we can do is to drop in and understand that we are living in a way that no longer aligns with who we are, what we long to be, long to be. So now we come into the last sentence I said here. I started to pay attention to my defensive ways. That is the observer. That is that ability to watch yourself with a neutral view. Once I became familiar with these worn out survival traits, it became easier to notice when they showed up. I decided to replace them with a gentler, more loving practice. I nurtured the child in me with consistent acts of kindness and noted how everything felt inside. I make that sound pretty easy. But what had started to happen, that process, was that I started to understand great, what felt great, what felt good, what felt not so good, and what felt bad. And I started leaning more into what felt good in my heart, not out there, but in here. And the kindness, the piece of kindness that you experience when you say something that aligns with who you truly are starts to resonate deeply. And once you felt it, you have the ability to return back to something similar to that. So I notice that we're getting close to the end of today's discussion. But what I'll do is I will pick up here next week. But I want to leave you with this because, as big as this might sound right now, the noticing, that transition that I spoke about, when I started to notice that it hurt to be like this, that I was hurting, that I was hurting others, that it no longer felt like something I could do, I started to pay attention in a different way. I started to tune into that observer, that objective view of myself in a way that said, help me understand, help me create a new way of being based on how I feel inside. So for today, I just want to tell you and reinforce this that every step of change is important. And it all starts with the hope that you can make a change because what you're doing doesn't feel good any longer. So if this is something that you feel aligned with, just start noticing, just start paying attention to what feels grounded, centered, and good for you in your heart. And start doing more of that. We'll pick up again next week. I'm so happy that you joined me today. And thank you for joining the Inside Book Club. We'll see you again soon.